The day Hazel found out she was pregnant, she sat on the edge of the bathtub for 45 minutes holding a positive test and listening to the rain hit the bathroom window of her apartment in Halifax. She didn't cry. She thought she would, but she didn't. She just sat there, and the only thing she could think about was how she'd have to call her mother, and how her mother would say, "I told you so," without actually saying it, and how she'd have to somehow explain Dominic Slade to a woman who'd spent her whole life warning her about men like him. She never made that call. She figured her belly would explain things well enough on its own. That was 6 years ago. Hazel ran her coffee shop on Agricola Street the same way she ran everything else in her life, with both hands, no backup, and a very specific kind of tiredness that only single mothers understand. The shop was called Groundwork, which she'd chosen for reasons she no longer remembered clearly, but felt were still true. The espresso machine had a leak she kept meaning to fix. The floor near the back door warped when it rained. There was a chalkboard above the counter where she wrote a different quote every Monday morning, and she'd been doing it for so long that she'd started repeating quotes without noticing, and her regulars had started keeping track. Her daughter, Lily, was 6. She had Hazel's mouth and Dominic's eyes, dark gray, unsettling, the kind of eyes that made people feel seen when they didn't necessarily want to be. Lily also had his ability to walk into a room and immediately understand the power dynamics of it, which was, Hazel felt, a deeply inconvenient trait in a first grader. Lily asked about her father occasionally, in the vague way children ask about things they don't have language for yet. Hazel always answered carefully. "He was someone I cared about very much. He had to go away." No, I don't know when he's coming back. This was not entirely untrue. What was true, what Hazel had never said out loud to anyone, was that Dominic Slade had not simply gone away. He had looked at her across a hotel room in Montreal, said something that she'd spent 3 years trying to unhear, and then disappeared so completely that she'd started to wonder if she'd hallucinated the entire year they'd spent together. She had not hallucinated it. She had a 6-year-old with gray eyes as proof. The morning he walked back into her life started like every other Tuesday. Hazel was behind the counter at 6:15, coaxing the espresso machine into cooperation, when her assistant Bree came in stamping snow off her boots and immediately said, "There's a black SUV parked across the street that's been there since before I got here, and the windows are tinted, and honestly, I feel like we should call somebody." Hazel glanced out the window. The SUV was there. She looked at it for a moment longer than was natural, then turned back to the espresso machine. "It's probably someone waiting for a parking spot for 40 minutes? Bree, I'm just saying." Hazel made herself not think about the SUV. She pulled shots and steamed milk and wrote the day's quote on the chalkboard. "The most courageous act is still to think for yourself," aloud. Coco Chanel, and somewhere around 8 o'clock the morning rush started properly, and she stopped thinking about the vehicle entirely. She didn't see him until noon. The shop had emptied out between the morning rush and the lunch crowd, that quiet 40-minute window Hazel usually used to eat something and check her supplier emails. She was in the back with half a sandwich when Bree's voice came through the doorway, not loud but pointed. "Hazel, someone's here." Something in the way she said it made Hazel put down the sandwich. She walked out front. He was standing near the door, not at the counter, like he hadn't decided yet whether he was coming in or leaving. He was wearing a dark coat, the kind of coat that costs more than some people's rent, and he looked the same as she remembered in all the ways that mattered, and older in all the others. His jaw was harder. There was a scar at his left temple she didn't recognize. He was watching her the way he used to, like she was a problem he was trying to solve, like he'd already run the calculations twice and didn't trust the answer. Dominic Slade. Hazel's first thought was Lily. Her second thought was, don't let him see that that was your first thought. "We're between rushes," she said. Her voice came out steady. She was proud of it. "You'll have to order something." He sat down. She made him an Americano because she didn't ask what he wanted, and it was what she remembered he drank. And the fact that her hands remembered that without consulting her brain made her angrier than anything else. She set the cup on the table across from him and sat down because her legs told her to, and because standing over him felt like exactly the wrong kind of power. "How did you find me?" she said. Not a question, more of an accounting. "I've always known where you were." She looked at him. "That's not." He stopped, pressed his mouth together. "I wasn't watching you. I wasn't having you watched. I just made sure I knew you were safe." "You made sure you knew I was safe," she repeated. "Hazel, for 6 years." He didn't answer that. She watched something move across his face that she couldn't name and didn't want to. "Why are you here, Dominic?" He wrapped both hands around the coffee cup she'd given him, and for a second he looked so human that it almost broke something in her. Almost. "Because I'm in trouble," he said, "and the only person I trust in this city is you, and I know I have no right to that." "You have no right to that," she agreed. "I know." She should have stood up. She should have walked to the door, opened it, and waited until he understood. She knew this. The part of her that had spent 6 years learning to need nothing. From Dominic Slade knew this with the bone-deep certainty of hard experience. She stayed seated. "Talk," she said. What he told her took 40 minutes and a second Americano that he didn't ask for, and she made anyway. The version of Dominic that Hazel had loved in her mid-20s had been a man she knew was dangerous, in a way she hadn't fully understood yet. She'd been 26, finishing her business degree, working part-time at a bar where he happened to come in one night and happened to sit at her section and happened to tip like someone who had never had to think about money. She'd known, in the abstract, that he was connected to things she didn't ask about. She'd told herself that every relationship has its compartments. She'd been young enough to believe that love was an exemption. Then she'd watched him take a phone call in that Montreal hotel room and understood, in about 30 seconds, exactly what kind of man she'd allowed herself to love. He had not known she was pregnant when he left. She had not known she was pregnant when he left. That was the only thing, in the entire architecture of their history, that she was certain was not a lie. What he was telling her now was this: the organization he ran, which he named carefully, in a way that suggested he knew she already knew, which she did, mostly, was being targeted. Not by law enforcement. By another family, one moving up from Toronto that wanted Halifax as an entry point for something much larger. 3 of his men had been hurt in the last 2 weeks. Someone had put a device in his car on Friday. Last night, they had left something on the step of the house he'd been using, and it had been addressed not to him, but to the people he was closest to. "They don't know about her," he said. Hazel went very still. "As far as anyone in that world is concerned, I don't have." He stopped. His jaw worked. "I kept that separate. I kept you both separate. Both." The word landed in the center of her chest. He knew. Of course he knew. He'd just told her he'd always known where she was. "Say it," she said. He met her eyes. "I know I have a daughter." The coffee shop was quiet around them. Outside, a delivery truck went by. The espresso machine made a small, inadequate sound. "Her name is Lily," Hazel said, and she hated herself a little for giving him even that. But his face, the way his face changed at that, the way something in it cracked open for just a second before he controlled it again, that she could not have prepared herself for. "Lily," he said quietly. "She's 6. He nodded. He already knew that too, she supposed. "She doesn't know about you," Hazel said. "And right now I'm very focused on keeping it that way. So if the reason you're here is to tell me she's in danger because of who you are, I need you to understand that this conversation ends the second I believe that to be true." "She's not in danger," he said. "They don't know. But I needed you to know that I'm here, so that you'd have time to take her somewhere, if things escalate. I have a place, outside the city. You'd have security, you'd have everything you need. I'm not taking my daughter to a safe house, Dominic." "Hazel, I'm not doing it." He looked at her like she was still that problem he couldn't solve. "You always did think the world was smaller than it is, and you always thought danger was something you could manage with enough money," she said. "We were both wrong about a lot of things." He left 20 minutes later. He put his hand on the door and then stopped with his back to her. "I'm sorry," he said. "For Montreal, I know it doesn't fix anything. I'm sorry." She didn't answer. He walked out. Bree appeared from behind the pastry counter where she had absolutely been listening to the entire conversation. "Who?" she said. "Was that?" "Nobody," Hazel said. Bree looked at the door, looked at Hazel, looked at the door again. He looked like somebody. Mind the counter. She didn't tell herself it meant nothing because she was 32 years old and had stopped lying to herself around 28. It meant something. It meant a lot of things she didn't have words for yet and wasn't sure she wanted. What she focused on was Lily. She picked her up from school that afternoon like every afternoon, and Lily talked the entire walk home about a disagreement she'd had at lunch, about whether penguins were technically birds, and whether her position, yes, technically, but they'd evolved to be something different, was correct. And Hazel listened and agreed in the right places, and felt the full weight of everything Dominic had told her sitting on the back of her sternum like a stone. That night, after Lily was in bed, Hazel stood at her kitchen window and looked at the street below for a long time. She didn't see anything that worried her. She told herself that this was not reassuring, because threats that don't show themselves are the worst kind. She told herself she should call her sister in Wolfville and arrange a visit. She told herself a lot of things. At 11:15, her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered it because the day had already happened, and there didn't seem to be much point in pretending it hadn't. "Two of my people are outside your building," Dominic said. "You don't have to do anything. You won't see them unless something happens. But I want you to know they're there. You can't just, I know I can't, but I did." She pressed her hand flat against the window glass. The cold of it moved up through her palm, and she left it there. "I used to think," she said, "that you'd show up one day and explain everything and it would make sense. That there'd be a reason that would make the whole year we were together feel like something other than, I know. I'm not finished." She surprised herself with how steady she sounded. "I spent a really long time angry at you. Then I spent a really long time just getting on with it. And I've been fine. We've been fine. What I need from you right now is not an explanation. What I need from you is the truth about how much danger my daughter is in, and what you're doing about it, and when it'll be over. That's all I need." A long pause. 3 days, he said. "Maybe 4. There's a meeting being arranged. The situation is being contained. I give you my word that she is not a target, and that I won't let her become one." "Your word," she said. "I know what it's worth to you right now. I'm offering it anyway." She looked at the street. She thought about how he'd said Lily in the coffee shop, like the name was something he was learning to hold. "You said you've always known where we were." Yes, you knew about her. You knew where we lived. You knew what she was called. Her voice didn't shake, which still surprised her. "And you chose to stay away." He was quiet for a long moment. "I thought it was the safer choice for both of you. That wasn't your choice to make." "No," he said. "It wasn't. You're right." She waited for him to say something else. He didn't. 3 days, she said finally. 3 days. She hung up. She stood at the window for another few minutes, and then she went to Lily's room and stood in the doorway, the way parents do, watching the small breathing shape under the blanket, feeling the specific terror of loving something so much that the world becomes a much more dangerous place just by virtue of containing it. Lily had a stuffed penguin on her pillow. Of course she did. Hazel went to bed. The next 2 days were ordinary, in the way that days are when you're waiting for something. Hazel opened groundwork at 6 and closed it at 4. She made coffee, and she invoiced her suppliers, and she wrote "Well-behaved women seldom make history" on the chalkboard. And one of her regulars, an older woman named Jean, who came in every morning and always ordered the same thing, read it and said "about time" with great feeling. Bree didn't ask any more questions about Dominic, which meant she was waiting for Hazel to bring it up herself, which Hazel was not going to do. She picked Lily up from school. She made pasta and helped with spelling homework. She watched half a documentary about the Arctic before Lily fell asleep against her shoulder on the couch. And Hazel sat there with the remote in her hand and her daughter's breath warm against her arm, and did not let herself think about the 2 men parked somewhere outside the building who were there because of a choice she'd made at 26. On the 3rd day, one of those men knocked on the coffee shop door before she'd turned the sign to open. He was young, with a Halifax Mooseheads jacket and the kind of face that looked deliberately forgettable. He handed her an envelope. Inside was a handwritten note that said, "It's handled. They're gone. You're clear." And below that, in the same handwriting, "I'd like to meet her. I don't have the right to ask. But I'm asking." Hazel stood there for a full minute with that note in her hand. Then she folded it, put it in her apron pocket, and turned the sign to open. She thought about it for a week. She thought about it while she was pulling shots, and while she was doing payroll, and while she was brushing Lily's hair, and while she was lying awake at 3 in the morning staring at the ceiling with the particular alertness of someone whose mind has decided that sleep is an unaffordable luxury. She thought about what it would mean. For Lily, who had spent 6 years with a mother who worked too hard and loved her so fiercely it sometimes made Hazel's hands shake. For herself, who had put the chapter of Dominic Slade behind a door she'd thought was closed. For him, who had stayed away because he'd decided that was safer, which was wrong, which he knew was wrong, but which she understood in the part of her that had also sometimes wanted to protect Lily by making the world smaller. She called him on a Saturday. The number she used was not the one from the unknown caller. She found it through a sequence of events she didn't fully want to examine. He picked up on the second ring. "I haven't decided anything," she said, before he could speak. "And this isn't forgiveness. You don't get that on a phone call." "Okay," he said. "She doesn't know who you are. You're meeting her as a person, not as anything else. What you tell her, when you tell her we do that together on my timeline. Are we clear? Yes. And if she's uncomfortable, if she asks you to leave, you leave, Hazel. Yes. Whatever you need." She pressed her thumb against her lower lip, the way she did when she was deciding things. "Sunday," she said, 2 o'clock. "There's a park on Windsor Street with swings." She likes swings. "You'll be there as someone who knows me from a long time ago. That's all. That's all it is, for now." The silence on his end was the kind that takes up a lot of space. "Thank you," he said finally, and his voice was different from any voice she'd heard from him in a long time, open in a way she hadn't expected, like something that had been closed for years and was only now, carefully, beginning to come apart. Sunday was cold, the way November in Halifax is always cold, which is sharp and direct and uninterested in your feelings about it. Lily was wearing her red coat with the mismatched buttons. She'd replaced 2 of them herself with buttons from Hazel's sewing box, a green one and a yellow one, because she liked the chaos of it. And she was on the swings before Hazel had even gotten to the bench. He arrived at 2:05. He was wearing the dark coat again, and he stood at the entrance to the park for a moment before he saw her, and then he walked over. He sat beside her on the bench. Neither of them said anything. Lily swung. She was singing something quietly to herself, not a real song, just a sound. "She sings all the time," Hazel said, without meaning to. "Does she? It's not musical. She's just making noise. She's always making noise. When she's happy, she's loud. She's very loud." He was watching Lily the way she'd watched him in the coffee shop, like a calculation he didn't trust. "She looks like you," he said. "She looks like you," Hazel said. "The eyes." He didn't respond for a long moment. Then he made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh, and wasn't quite a breath, and wasn't quite anything she had a word for. Lily's swing slowed. She dragged her heels and turned to look at them with the frank assessment of a 6-year-old who had decided that the adult on the bench was worth examining. "Who's that?" she called to Hazel. "Someone Mama knows," Hazel called back. "His name's Dominic." Lily considered this. She considered him. "Do you like swings?" she asked him with complete seriousness. He looked at Hazel for just a second. "I never really had the chance to find out," he said. Lily hopped off the swing. She walked over to the bench and looked at him from a short distance, and Hazel's heart was doing something completely unreasonable the whole time. "There's an empty one," Lily said, pointing. "You should try." He looked at the swing. He looked at Lily. He looked at Hazel, who gave him absolutely nothing to work with, and was not sorry about it. He stood up and walked to the empty swing. He sat in it somewhat awkwardly, the way a man in an expensive coat sits in playground equipment, and pushed himself back just slightly, and then forward. Lily immediately appointed herself the authority on technique. "You have to use your legs," she said, at high volume, demonstrating from her own swing. "Like this, push back and then kick forward. You're barely moving." "I'm getting there," he said. "You're really not." Hazel sat on the bench with her hands folded in her lap and watched her daughter instruct the most dangerous man she'd ever loved in the mechanics of a playground swing, and felt something in her chest do something she could not explain and had not budgeted for. It was not forgiveness. She'd been clear about that. It was not a plan or a decision or a resolution. It was just the three of them in a park in November, in the cold, with the gray Halifax sky above them, and the sound of lilies not quite singing and the scrape of chains, and somewhere in it was the beginning of something she didn't have a name for yet. She didn't need to name it right now. She let herself not name it and watched her daughter laugh at a man who was trying, quite sincerely and quite badly, to learn how to use a swing, and she breathed the cold air in and let it out. And for the first time in a long time, she let the moment just be what it was.